A lot of the series has felt refreshing and fun, the inside baseball look at Hollywood, but this just felt like an excuse to have Rogen do some drug comedy, some drug acting, you know?
It's not acting.
Welcome back to another episode of The Rank. I'm John, and today we're going to be ranking another episode of The Studio. Now, the premise of this whole thing is to figure out what sitcom is the best of all time by going through every episode and ranking them, and then averaging the rankings of each episode for the whole series. So I'm going to figure out what sitcom is the best one of all time. Now, if you're enjoying these episodes, if you're just a fan of The Studio and enjoy consuming content about it, please consider subscribing and or following, like the episodes and comment, or email your suggestions at the email below. And please also consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page at patreon.com/TheRankPodcast. Now today, we're ranking the 9th episode of the first season of The Studio, titled CinemaCon, which was written by Alex Gregory and directed by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. And since this is a new series, I am avoiding spoilers. So there shouldn't be spoilers, but, you know, I think I've been doing a good job of avoiding them, but, you know, I think we should still say warning that there might be spoilers. Anyway, let's get into it, starting with the Potent Notables.
Potent Notables.
As they are wont to do, they like to reference movies in this show, and in this episode, it's Swingers. Driving through Vegas, Matt, Sal, and Quinn quote Swingers several times, even talking about Swingers, with Vegas and "You're so money." So just a cute little reference thing there. And then on to our cameo of the episode, which is Dave Franco. Dave, who says he's a very boring person these days, that's his quote, really enjoyed playing a drugged up party animal version of himself, that there was a, quote, niceness in the unhingedness of it all. I take it to a level where it becomes kind of toxic positivity. But yes, it's very fun to play a part that is very different than who I am, end quote. So to continue hammering this point, he added, quote, I do not go to Vegas. I barely even drink. I definitely don't do drugs. An exciting night these days is staying home and watching a documentary with our 2 cats, end quote.
And you believe that?
Maybe overcompensating here, I don't know. But anyway, even so, he found freedom in playing himself, that he could take it as far as he wanted to go. Quote, it's like the crazier you go, the better. Just poke fun at yourself and be as silly as possible. And there's no wrong answer, because it's like, hey, I'm playing me. You can't fault me for what I'm doing in any of these scenes. This is me. Now, as far as picking Dave Franco for this, Seth Rogen said, quote, honestly, there were very few people that could have filled the roles that the people had filled, because we really specifically were catering the stories to certain traits that celebrities have. With Dave, it's like, who do you believe would be in a Ron Howard movie? It's a pretty dramatic movie. Who could do that? But also, we knew that he would come back and do this truly ridiculous, stupid thing later in the season, end quote. So those are the Potent Notables. Let's go to the episode overview. For this episode, instead of a behind the scenes of CinemaCon, we end up getting a Seth Rogen drug comedy. Now, for any of you who have listened to the episode when Zach and I ranked the night before, you'll know that I enjoy that type of comedy, especially from Seth Rogen, because he does it so well. That being said, it wasn't really what I was looking for or hoping for from him in this series. It's not that the episode didn't work. It still made me laugh, and it's very well made, and Seth Rogen still does drug-addled humor better than most, if not all. It's just that it didn't feel particularly new. A lot of the series has felt refreshing and fun, the inside baseball look at Hollywood, but this just felt like an excuse to have Rogen do some drug comedy, some drug acting, you know?
It's not acting.
The premise here is that they are headed to CinemaCon. Matt's first as the studio head, and when they get there, he finds out from Griffin Mill, the CEO played by Bryan Cranston, that the board of Comworld, which is the owner of Continental Studios, is trying to sell the studio to Amazon. Now, the pressure is on because they believe that if they can have a killer presentation at this year's CinemaCon, that it'll make the studio too valuable to sell. Now, to me, this is confusing, because this logic just wouldn't Amazon be even more interested in the studio if it looked like they were going to make a lot of money? It actually would make more sense to make the studio look like it had no value, which would convince the board not to bother selling it, because they wouldn't get as much as they would want for it, right? Anyway, that's how we are presented the plot. Now, what would you do if you found out you have to have the absolute best presentation the next day starting at 7:30 in the morning, or you'll lose your job? If your first thought is to throw a raging party with drugs and alcohol, you'd be on the exact same page as Matt Remick. I'm sure you can imagine it, that nothing goes wrong from here. Now, I know I'm making it sound like I didn't like it, and I didn't like it as much as other episodes, but there's a reason that Seth Rogen has made so much money making drug movies. He's really good at playing high. And with that, this episode does have a few more laughs than some of the other better episodes. Not quite as much as last week's episode, but pretty decent. Still though, this episode was a bit of a letdown, so let's see how it ended up ranking.
A rank.
So the rank is where I rank the episode based on 5 categories: story, acting, dialogue, episode coherence, and character relatability. I rank it on a score of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. And then we have a laugh counter, where I tally up the amount of times that the episode made me laugh out loud. 1 point per laugh out loud, and that gets added to the score. The first category is story, which I gave a 2.5. The story is that Seth Rogen wanted to have a drug episode, and he did. It's not terrible. It's not good. It says, the kids would say, mid. That feels natural when I say it, right?
How do you do, fellow kids?
What?
All right, let's go to acting, which I gave a 4.5. Well, the story may not be my cup of tea, but the acting was certainly really good. Actually, Ike Barinholtz playing Coked Up was one of his better performances. Sort of makes me wonder about him a little bit. Hope you're all right over there, Ike. Seth obviously plays drugged up better than anyone. Everyone was great. I did really enjoy Dave Franco in this as well. He seems like such a happy guy. And nuts, too. So that's fun. Next category is dialogue, which I gave a 4. It was definitely funny, and I'm sorry to keep harping on this, but it was just so, look, they're doing drugs. Isn't that funny? They have great writers on this show, so it's still excellent. Just could have been better if they had focused more on satire like the first 8 episodes. Next category is episode coherence, which I gave a 2.25. I addressed some of this in the overview, like why would they think that having a great presentation would stop a sale? It would just mean they'd potentially get more for the sale. Right? Why would you throw a rager the night before you're supposed to be up early to give a presentation, which you now believe your entire studio and your job is at stake to get right? On top of those coherence issues, we've also got the sort of haphazard, all over the place madcap thing going on. And I'm avoiding giving any spoilers by saying it the way I said it, but while it wasn't that it wasn't fun, it also was a little too absurd. So let's go to character relatability, which I gave a 4. So the coherence issues I mentioned may seem a little like a bleed over into relatability, but I think the characters are pretty relatable. As much as I find Matt pathetic, I can empathize with his need to be accepted by the industry and people in it that he so reveres, right? I can certainly appreciate Patty, especially at the end. Griffin Mill is probably the least relatable in the episode. He makes a lot of bizarre choices, but whatever. All right, so let's go to the laugh counter, which definitely saved this episode. I got 13 laughs out of it, which is not super high, but it's enough to keep it from being a poor ranking. So the total for this episode is a 30.25, which means it squeaks into I'd watch it again. That puts the series average at a 32.4, which means it continues to be in I'd watch it again. So thanks for listening and or watching. If you'd like to see a list of our episode and series rankings, you can do that on our website at therankpodcast.com. Remember to subscribe, review, and comment. And please consider supporting us on our Patreon site at patreon.com/therankpodcast, where you'll get access to all of our archived episodes. And I will leave you with this. They were going to do a big presentation, but now it's all messed up. And I know why. Why, man? Because they got high, because they got high, because they got high.
Just never do that again!
Now, what would you do if you had fucking motherfucker? Bum, bum, bum.
Maybe it's the drugs.